Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
And what we're going to start off with is the one thing that has really taken over the entire world ever since March, the coronavirus pandemic. And the thing is, the pandemic is still going on. I remember back in mid-March when this pandemic was supposed to be just kicking off, we were expecting it to be over literally by May. It's October now. And it really has shifted the way that the sports world as a whole has reacted. I kind of went into this topic a little back into week one. However, since that first show, a bunch of news has come out that I think really changes the way that the NCAA moves forward with all of this pandemic-related stuff. Because a thing that I have noticed is that the NCAA and the NFL are very intertwined with each other, because without the NFL, there's really no need for college football to be there. But without the college level talent, that developmental aspect that college football provides, you get no good players in the NFL. So it kind of works like that, they kind of play off of each other. But when it comes to the rules, it's almost always NFL first. I feel like so many of the rules have been implemented by the NFL first and then kind of gets picked up by the college level to varying degrees. Not every single one, but, a good chunk of them have. And I think the way that this pandemic is going to be handled moving forward kind of reflects that in some way. Because the thing is, if you think about it, the NFL had their plans in the virus relief first. College football followed suit, and college football, for the most part pretty much, kind of took a little bit of a copy and paste formula from the NFL, which honestly, I'm not completely against. I think if somebody has a better idea than you, does the same thing but better than you, is advancing faster than you, whatever it is, you should try to implement that into your own thing so that way you can learn how to do it just as well. It makes perfect sense, right? I don't see why it doesn't, honestly. As long as you do it in a way where you can do it honestly and fairly and you're not really hurting yourself in it, it doesn't really matter. That's why the NCAA has not really caught a whole lot of flack when the plan initially came into place. However, it seems like the NCAA as a whole has been handling the situation very well. The way they have handled things has been very unique because not every program has done things perfectly, to say the least. We saw all the way back in the first week of the college season, which I believe was the first week of September, that Tennessee initially had a scrimmage planned, and then they had to cancel the entire scrimmage, largely because of the fact that they had a few players test positive, as well as some contact tracing done. As of this past weekend, Notre Dame versus Wake Forest was canceled because players were tested positive for the coronavirus. In week 3, there were 2 postponements. It was North Carolina and Charlotte was postponed, just flat out canceled because I believe Charlotte had positive cases, and I believe BYU and Army was canceled because BYU had positive cases. In week 2, there was postponements between UCF and Florida International, and then a couple of other postponements back in week 1, including Rice and Houston, as well as Florida International and Jacksonville State, all of which have been because of positive tests. And the thing is that when something like this happens, it kind of makes you reevaluate what the other sports have been doing. The thing is, the NCAA, at least in the football sense, is not completely separated from every other sport out there. Because the NCAA by itself is one large entity, and the NCAA does not treat football very differently from other sports, even though it's their big thing for things like publicity and marketing and boosters and however you want to call it. But the thing about the NCAA and, the NCAA football as well is that it's not a perfect system. I think the perfect system has already been done. However, there were some big flaws with it. And when I say perfect system, I mean perfect for the play itself. This does not include anything personal with the players. This does not include anything personal regarding the coaches. I'm talking perfect in terms of handling the virus itself. Because every single one of the systems I'm going to talk about across the big four professional sports as well as the NCAA, they all have their own flaws. I'm going to start with this one specific league because it's the one that this entire show is based off of. It's the NCAA and it's football. There's no bubble, really. They're not trying to isolate people. They're not really trying to isolate people. Not really trying to go crazy by completely shutting down the stadium. Most of these places are letting students and fans into the stadium as long as there's adequate masks and social distancing. In which, who really knows if that's been working, because over just 4 games into the season so far, 2 games were canceled back in week 1. A game was postponed in week 2. A game was canceled and another was postponed in week 3. And in week 4, there was another game canceled. The thing is that in week 5, we don't know yet. Because literally, they play as soon as later today, and that can literally change everything in the next 24 hours. There's no real strict enforcement policies in terms of how these students are doing things like going to class, how they're interacting with other students. Or are they just told to go to class and then go straight back into their rooms or houses or apartments? Or are they actually, having in-person classes, masked and distanced? Who knows how it's working out. However, all I do know is that we already have a bunch of games that have been canceled. Tennessee had a scrimmage that was canceled. Could it be because of the fans? Possibly. I don't want to say anything definitive yet. But I can say is that the NCAA, at least for my blood, has been a little bit too lax with everything. Let's compare with the NFL, actually. The NCAA is what I refer to as the big brother. The NFL has done a pretty much outstanding job so far. They've done as good of a job as you can think of for a major sports league that has not conducted a bubble. Because there's no fans. Literally just the players and the coaches, and they test them every day, and they're with all the medical personnel, so on and so forth. They have backup plans in terms of the scheduling, in terms of shifting the schedule around, in terms of canceling games. Literally the NFL, as of the release of this podcast, they've had to shift the schedule around because a bunch of players from the Tennessee Titans, personnel and players, were all tested positive. So what do they have to do? Essentially shut down the entire facility, have everyone isolate, and then we wait and see as their matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers all shuffles around, as not necessarily only because these players need some time to recover from said virus, but also because they need to figure out who's going to replace them, how they're going to practice them, so on and so forth. This is the first major incident that the NFL has had regarding the virus ever since they've listed all of their protocols and stuff, because they've been very airtight about that. This is the only solution that kind of makes sense with the way the NCAA trajectory is going, because of the fact that it is virtually the exact same thing as what the NCAA is trying to do. Aside from Miami and Jacksonville and Dallas and Kansas City, every other team in the NFL has 0 fans. I know that the New Orleans Saints tried toying with a couple fans, most family and friends. I know that there have been talks with Governor Cuomo of New York to get the Bills to reopen at least a few hundred to a few thousand seats. I think the limit they're trying to get is 5,000, but they're working on ways to try to socially distance everything, which I think is really good, because it does mean that the NFL could get to a place where they can actually have almost all stadiums have fans, just depending on, whatever legislation. It's just this one outbreak with the Tennessee Titans scares me a little bit, because not only can they, number one, contract it to other players and other teammates and even other teams, but number two, it helps make the precedent into how to continue going forward much harder on not only the NFL, but also on the NCAA as well. Let's switch to the next sport that's maybe the next closest to what the NCAA is doing, and that's baseball. Same thing, 0 fans across the board. But they got reamed, the MLB did. They were calling for Rob Manfred's head when the virus started contracting around the players, because when that happened, people were very upset about it. Like, how could you let the virus get in the facility? Look at all the people you infected. Look at all the personnel, all the players. What about them? They're in tight quarters with them. Blah, 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 blah. And it's the exact same thing. And honestly, I criticize the MLB about it too. And I think the MLB has so many reasons to be criticized. However, the thing is, the MLB, they adjusted as they went. They learned as they went along, and I give the MLB credit for that. I do not believe they had a virus positive case since then. They've actually started the playoffs. And speaking of playoffs, that's going to go right into my next point, which is the NBA. Because they had the pure bubble. A couple hundred, couple thousand of personnel, whether it was, cooking, cleaning, salons, recreational places, health experts, player personnel, coaching personnel, stuff like that. Several thousand people locked in together. No one comes in or out unless, the reason is absolutely necessary. And then the player or coach or whomever would self-isolate. And the thing about the NBA is they eventually let the families into the stadiums, which I think is not only good for the players, but it's good for the fans as well. Like, think about it this way. You created virtual fans because of the NBA. Just the overall concept of virtual fans. And also you have the fact that you had all these players, interacting with each other, being around each other all the time. It made for a different dynamic across the NBA, but I think the bubble in the NBA was an absolute hit. Because without the NBA bubble, we wouldn't get the NHL bubble. But the thing about the NBA bubble is that it had its leaks. Players left the bubble, would get strip club wings, and then come back. Some players, right before the family visits, would try to hit on a medical personnel staff member and then get completely exposed for it and then essentially lose his job on said team. Literally the day before they were supposed to play a very important game in their series. No direct names, just contexts, and this all goes to my point with the NHL, because I think they executed the bubble the best. I think the plan that the NHL had, the National Hockey League had, was the best plan of the 5. Same thing as the NBA. A bubble. But because there's so many teams, and because these cities in Edmonton and Toronto are not exactly big cities, they had to separate the two bubbles, East and West. West went to Edmonton, Alberta, and East went to Toronto, Ontario. And then once they got to the conference finals, they would all converge in Edmonton. Broadcasters allowed in the arena. News people allowed in the arena. Coaches and staff, no people. Except for family, and I believe it was only for the Stanley Cup Finals. So literally, they didn't get a visitation from family until the finals. But the thing with that happening is that they had 0 leaks. Nobody snuck out. Nobody snuck people in. Nobody did this thing or that thing or this thing or that thing to cause any sort of drama in the NBA, in the NHL bubble. 0 drama in the NHL bubble because they were so good at keeping everything focused on the task at hand. I don't know how sports is going to appear or what they're going to do when this thing is over. However, what I do know is that the NCAA should realistically be scared. Because I do not want them to end up like an MLB, where they're going to face scrutiny after scrutiny after scrutiny after scrutiny. I don't want them to end up like the Tennessee Titans, where they have a bunch of their players, a bunch of personnel exposed literally one time, and it ruins the entirety of the rest of their season. I don't want that to happen for the NCAA. But with, things like BYU Army, with Florida International, so on and so forth, it makes it difficult. Decisions will be made. Whether those games will be rescheduled another time or whether they'll just axe them from the schedule. And that doesn't even include the fact that the Pac-12 and the Big Ten are coming, and the fact that the Pac-12's schedule release is coming literally at noon on college football game day. Who knows how that shakes everything up? Who knows how the Big Ten actually playing is going to matter in the long run? We'll have to wait and find out, but we'll just have to see. That was my discussion about sports during the coronavirus era. And we're going to be taking a quick break, and right after this, we're going to be talking about Mike Greenberg's comments regarding Trevor Lawrence, and we'll also be talking about how junior quarterbacks drafted number 1 overall should indeed stay in college, or whether they decide to go straight into the pros. I'll give you the pros and cons of that, which is coming up right after this.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And we're back. here on the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Once again, Ryan Lee back at you. We just talked about how the various different sports across the Big Four plus the NCAA have been handling the pandemic and the various different options of how to prevent any sort of cancellation of games, very similar to BYU and Army did earlier in the year, and kind of similar to how the Tennessee Titans are going to have to do this week. But I want to move on to another segment, and this is a very interesting segment because this isn't a typical segment. If you follow along the show, you know several things. Number one, I like to talk a lot about the games themselves. Because without the games themselves, we wouldn't even have this show to begin with. Number two, I love talking betting. Betting's fun. Once again, please be responsible with your money. However, you want to make things interesting? Throw a few bucks into the mix. But another thing that we talk about, I just choose not to talk about it as often because it doesn't really come up as often, is comments, concerns, questions, so on and so forth that get brought up by other shows, other people in sports media, because sometimes they make crazy comments. Sometimes they sound absolutely crazy. Sometimes they actually make a lot of sense. And they're more wrong than right because when they make picks like that, they are 95% speculation. Not really much good comes out of just random speculation and guessing. I mean, yeah, you can say it's based on statistics or trends or objectives or patterns, whatever. I do the same thing. I'm not perfect. I admit it, but I try to come as close as possible. This actually segues into my main point very nicely. ESPN. A very controversial network for having a lot of controversial people. However, I was scrolling through the socials earlier today and saw this clip from Mike Greenberg, member of the ESPN staff, one of their reporters. I saw him talking about Trevor Lawrence, the projected number one overall draft pick in this coming year's draft. Quarterback at Clemson, junior this year. And he was talking about whether or not Lawrence should go into the draft. Because right now, at least it looks at the NFL landscape, it looks like the Jets are the worst team in football as of right now. The Jets are kind of a team that has been kind of known for not being the greatest run franchise in the world. You know, kind of to put it nicely, the Jets have a quarterback that honestly is actually pretty good in terms of overall talent, Sam Darnold. The thing is that everything outside of Sam Darnold is not great. It seems promising because it's young, but at the same time, the staff, the GMs, they're not doing anything to develop any of those players. Sam Darnold has not been developing well with the Jets because of the fact that he has nothing around him to give him help. No offensive line, no wide receivers, no good running backs, etc. You know, all because Sam Darnold hasn't been getting help. Even some of the greatest players of all time, any sport, I'll give you any sport, there have not been one-man armies. Literally all 6 years when Michael Jordan won a championship, he had a great number 2. And 3, 4, 5, and 6, and so on and so forth. He still had Pippen. He got Rodman. He had Steve Kerr, who was great. John Paxson was great. You watched The Last Dance. Assuming you did. If not, go watch it on Netflix. But if you did, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That mini Golden State dynasty there. Steph had KD still. He still had Klay Thompson. Tom Brady is not Tom Brady without Julian Edelman throughout most of it. Peyton Manning, in his first championship, had Reggie Wayne to get through all of it. In his second, he had Von Miller. You need help. Players need help. Great quarterbacks can't carry the whole team by themselves. Bad coaching and bad roster development are two things that are impossible to get off as a quarterback by yourself. And Mike Greenberg acknowledges this on his show. And the exact quote that he uses is, quote, "In all honesty, if I were Trevor Lawrence and the Jets have the first pick in the draft, you would have to think long and hard about staying at Clemson another year. I believe Peyton Manning did that. I will always believe that Peyton Manning might have come out of Tennessee a year earlier if the Jets didn't have the first draft pick that year. And if I'm Trevor Lawrence, I would have to think long and hard about that because the Jets are a train wreck and there isn't an obvious reason to think it's getting better anytime soon." That's from Mike Greenberg from ESPN. Direct quote from last night. If it helps, literally 3/4 of my show is based on this one quote because he makes an excellent point, which is that the way that the franchises or the schools, just the way that leadership matters in a sports setting, it's absolutely phenomenally huge to these players, especially if they're young. I know there's a bunch of speculation out there, maybe some reports that claim that Justin Herbert, Tua Tagovailoa, they could wind up having the best college careers of their class, even better than Joe Burrow, which is 95% because of situation. If you want to look at a situation where the circumstances mattered, I'm going to give you 2018. Because that's when you had 5 first-round draftable quarterbacks. Look at 2018. 5 first-round draftable quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield coming from Oklahoma. Sam Darnold coming out of USC. Josh Allen coming out of Wyoming. Josh Rosen coming out of UCLA. As well as Lamar Jackson coming out of Louisville. Let's examine those 5 specifically. Because that's like a great This is an absolute great recent example. It includes one of the players we talked about, Sam Darnold, who I will talk about first. Because the New York Jets, ever since they drafted him, they've done a very bad job at developing a roster around him. And because of that, it's like they're asking Sam Darnold to keep this ship afloat, but he's not inside of the boat gathering a crew because his entire crew is, off at some party while Sam Darnold's doing everything he can to keep this boat on track as the captain of the ship. That's the best example I can do, but you gotta get the idea. Josh Rosen, on the other hand, was in a very similar situation in Arizona. He couldn't really get help his first year. He didn't really have the full support of the GM and ownership group from the get-go. And that's why he is currently a practice squad member on Tampa Bay. But Ryan, you may say, he's getting a chance to learn from Tom Brady on the practice squad. Is there a chance he could usurp Tom Brady when Brady retires? I'm sure that's a possibility. But the thing is, I don't see a lot of long-term sustainable quarterbacks that were on the practice squad their first several years. A lot of them were the backups their first year, for second-string backups, or they were playing the entirety of those first several years. Like, at this rate, Josh Rosen's career is going to be career backup. Because in Arizona, they didn't support him fully. Then he goes to Miami, not supported fully. Still wasn't supported fully in Miami when he left. And now with Tampa, they can't support him fully. The thing is, he has, let's say hypothetically Tom Brady goes down. Second stringer, whoever that is, goes down. Then Rosen's the third man up as the third string quarterback. He has all the weapons in the world, but the thing is, the circumstance for him personally is bad. I'm going to jump to the number 1 overall draft pick in this situation. Baker Mayfield. Great weapons. Amazing weapons. Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt. Great offensive line. David Njoku at the tight end, along with Austin Hooper. Literally almost every single weapon you can think of, Baker Mayfield's got in Cleveland. However, the big issue is inconsistency at coaching, very poor coaching, and issues with the GM. Freddie Kitchens was not worth the hire. They found that out too late. Hugh Jackson getting fired in the middle of the year in Mayfield's first year was a blessing in disguise. But the issue is, none of the coaches that have followed Hugh have been that great. Let's actually go to the next quarterback. I guess in this order, it's the next quarterback drafted in order, which is Josh Allen. He goes to Buffalo. And he goes in a situation where he has a great defensive head coach. You know, literally this is a head coach who's in the Andy Reid tree. A coordinator under Andy Reid. A coordinator under Ron Rivera. You know, he got to a Super Bowl as defensive coordinator. He found an offensive coordinator who made Super Bowls with New England and national championships with Alabama, Brian Daboll. He got a GM who is very good at finagling numbers and is very good at getting the best out of not only the players that he already has, but the players he acquires. Brandon Beane is excellent at that. And of course, a former Heisman winner, the NFL MVP in 2019, Lamar Jackson, who's been absolutely lights out. Has the weapons, has the coaching, has the management, and already has the MVP level talent for it. I don't want to go into the 2020 draft review because of the fact that it's too soon to tell so far. But let me put it this way. Joe Burrow has weapons. Coaching is not sure. Front office is not great. Tua's in a position where he's got great mentorship. Not necessarily has weapons there. He has one weapon and that's it. And Devontae Parker and that's it. But great coaching. And a front office who's at least willing to try to do what they can. Justin Herbert, great coach, great GM, great weapons. With Justin Herbert, it's just a matter of time in developing his game. Especially as Tyrod Taylor continues to be up with a punctured lung, he has to work on that as he is now. Jordan Love, same deal. Great coaching, great mentorship. He's got Aaron Rodgers as a mentor, for crying out loud. Being able to figure out those parts of the ins and outs of the game, I'm sure they're going to be just fine. But let's go through the different options that Trevor Lawrence has if he were to declare for the draft. Because the thing is, he does not have a lot of options. That's the thing. But like, the sad thing is that they're not necessarily Trevor Lawrence's options. These are the NFL's options that Trevor Lawrence is just going to have to abide by. And this is in no particular order, by the way. Let's just go through all of the teams who have yet to win so far. Atlanta, great offensive weapons, but their coach might get fired next week for blowing multiple 15-plus point leads. Houston, their head coach is also their GM, and they trade away their best player for scraps. Change the offense completely, and the offense looks like it's in complete shambles because of it. New York Giants, complete rebuild, will literally have zero support. Minnesota Vikings, great supporting cast, amazing weapons. However, the issue with the Minnesota Vikings is that there's some doubts with Mike Zimmer. And the front office has not been great as of late. As of related, the Cincinnati Bengals, they're winless. But at the same time, they've got Joe Burrow, who's a young developing quarterback, as I said earlier. He's got a good supporting cast, just not exactly as the coaching or the front office to get anything done with it. And then Philadelphia, great coach, great GM. However, Carson Wentz has zero weapons. Zero. Whether they get injured on him or whether they just come in and injured anyways. And those are just the winless teams so far in the NFL. You go through the teams with 1 wins, still a lot of teams. Washington, Detroit, Jacksonville. It brings a very interesting perspective into the mental science behind whether or not to declare for the draft. Because it's not just a, yes, I'm declaring, no, I'm declaring. It's about why they're declaring at the time they are, and when they are, and why they are. That matters. Junior quarterbacks are a thing all the time. Junior draftees happen all the time. You have no idea how many times I've seen junior draftees. You have no idea how many times I've seen senior year draftees. It literally depends on how you want to attack it and what you want to do with it. But the thing at the end is, if you land an organization with a great supporting cast, great coaching, and a great front office, you're set up for the most amount of success. Think Baltimore. Think Kansas City. After the break, where we are going to be talking about more on number 1 overall draft picks. How will these franchises have fared with different quarterbacks in their system? If junior quarterbacks stayed for the senior year, how would that have played out? Would quarterbacks still be taking number 1 overall? Or would they slide a little bit down the board? Would they still be worth it to their new team? Or does it just not exactly fit the mold? We'll find out right after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Here once again on the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. Once again, Ryan Lee here. We just talked about not only the latest on Mike Greenberg's comments about Trevor Lawrence and how that's going to shake up the NFL draft, but we also talked about the whole situation with the pandemic and how that shifted the college football as well as the overall landscape of all sports. And I'm going to be talking about a very interesting topic, actually, that kind of revolves a little bit more on the circumstances surrounding the quarterback when they actually enter the draft. Now, I picked this topic largely because of the comments that were actually made by Mike Greenberg. And it kind of got me thinking. He's saying that if the Jets had the first overall draft pick, that Trevor Lawrence should stay in Clemson. And when I heard this, it got my wheels turning in my head. It got me thinking. How would a bunch of these juniors who declared for the draft, I'm going to focus specifically on number 1 overall draft picks here for simplicity reasons. What would change if they stayed an extra year? Would they be in a better situation? A worse situation? Would things have actually worked out for them? Would they be a better player now? What type of season would they have in college? Those are just a few examples of some of the things that we're going to be talking about. And also for this criteria, we're going to be focusing only on juniors. I want to reiterate that. Juniors only. Seniors are not in the conversation. So you're not going to hear me talk about Baker. You're not going to hear me talk about Burrow. None of that. I just want to put that out there for clarification purposes before you start questioning me on why I didn't include a certain quarterback. I want juniors only. That way I can put some merit behind Mike Greenberg, or I can say his theory just does not make any sense. Let's go with the latest number 1 overall draft pick quarterback who went into the draft his junior year, and that's Kyler Murray, current quarterback of the Arizona Cardinals. So many question marks going into him getting into the draft. It was 95%. Was he tall enough? No one doubted his accuracy. No one doubted his arm strength. No one doubted Kyler Murray's ability to play. He clearly does. He's very shifty. He's good with his legs. The only thing is the fact that he's 5'8" and like a half or something like that. In a league where the prototypical quarterback, you need to be about 6'2". He wound up being a Rookie of the Year candidate. But the thing is that Kyler was a transfer in. He was a true freshman. He competed with Kyle Allen for the starting job at Texas A&M. And then he would transfer to Oklahoma, where he'd back up Baker Mayfield. And then he would take over the role as a permanent starter when Mayfield went into the draft. And then when he went into Oklahoma in 2018, he led the Big 12 in touchdowns. He led the Big 12 in yards, as well as in completion percentage. And he set a Big 12 record in passer rating in a single year. Kyler Murray could have easily had a 50 touchdown year, because in his junior year, with the way the transfer rules plan out, I believe he still would have had one more year of eligibility remaining. He could have had easily a 50 touchdown year, because he had 42 in that junior year with Oklahoma. That's the thing. And with the way his talent level was, there was no way he couldn't get to 50. But the thing is that, let's assume everything pans out the exact same way. Draft order the exact same way. Drafting teams are the exact same spot. He would go to Cincinnati, and it'd be a question of where he would land. Would he usurp Joe Burrow for that number one spot? That's questionable. Would Washington have taken him? And would Miami have not gotten Tua, but would they have gotten Kyler instead? We don't know. But the fate of the Arizona Cardinals, as well as for Kyler Murray himself, would be very different now if he stayed for that senior season. The next most recent junior quarterback on the board here is Jared Goff, current quarterback of the LA Rams, former member of Cal Berkeley. And the thing is that the Rams were in absolute shambles before Jared Goff got there. Jared Goff was kind of that quarterback the Rams needed to have just any sense of stability. Because the thing is, Jared Goff had a great career at Cal. 4,700 yards, 43 touchdowns, 64% completion percentage. This was all his final year at Cal. A 3-year starter, got better every single year. Completion percentage increased by year. Passing yards increased by year. Yards per pass increased by year. Total touchdowns increased by year. Jared Goff was excellent. But the issue was that he didn't get unleashed, absolutely unleashed, until Sean McVay came around. And then he went to another level. Assuming everything stayed the same, the next year was Myles Garrett. But there were a lot of quarterbacks in that draft that are very high-end talents. We're talking Deshaun Watson. We're talking Patty Mahomes. I don't think he would have gone to either of those teams. Maybe Houston would have taken him, but who knows? If Jared Goff stayed for his senior season, there's zero chance he's a Ram still. Zero chance. With the way the progression was, it was just too great. The next quarterback I'm talking about who went number one overall, Jameis Winston, drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, current backup for the New Orleans Saints. I believe he's technically a third-string quarterback, if you include Taysom Hill. The thing about Jameis is that he was an interception machine when he was with the Buccaneers. The thing about Jameis Winston is that he only had 2 years at Florida State. Like, he won the Heisman in 2013, which was his actually first full year as a starter. The weird thing about Jameis Winston is he actually regressed in his second year at Florida State. He went from 66.9% completion percentage to 65.4%, which I know is a little bit cherry picking because it's not that big of a deal. But the thing is, he had something in the ballpark of over 80 more attempts in the air and 50 more completions in the air, which would drop that average a little bit. He went from 4,000 yards to about 3,900, which once again I could say is nitpicky, but the yards per average is significantly lower, especially considering the number of attempts. 4,000 yards and 257 catches versus 3,900 on 305 catches. That's a huge discrepancy there. His ratio went from 40-10 to 25-18, which honestly for me is a bit of a red flag because he regressed so much in the matter of like a year. And it kind of, I'm cherry picking a little bit when I say this, but I think it does make sense. It kind of seems like a bit of a red flag into the perception of him now, which is kind of a bit of a turnover machine. Despite being, All-American, All-ACC, stuff like that. Because he did win the national championship his second year. That's the thing that's the thing he has going with him that makes up for all the not-so-great stats. I think if Jameis Winston stayed one more year at Florida State, he would not be nearly as highly touted as he was. Because if the perception of him now followed him into a senior year, or I guess a redshirt junior year, he would drop so hard. Because of the way the trajectory his college career went into the NFL, he would have really struggled the senior year. He would not be a first-round draft pick. He would turn into like a third or a fourth. Because the turnovers are kind of killer. And it's a large chunk of the reason why Tampa Bay wants to move on from him. And they did. They did exactly that. For a good reason, honestly. So yeah, Jameis Winston's a bit concerning, honestly, if you ask me. And I'm going to go into one more quarterback for the sake of time. And this is the number one quarterback I want to get into because he is probably what most people consider the best prospect to come out of the draft in a very long time. Probably still the best quarterback prospect since Peyton Manning, is what a lot of the analysts say. And it's Andrew Luck, the junior from Stanford. Surprise retired last year from the game of football with the Indianapolis Colts. Very surprisingly retired out of nowhere. I loved Andrew Luck so much. I'm throwing this out there. I wish he was still playing. He deserves so much better than what the Colts gave him. Especially with all the injuries. But I understand it's a physical and mental and emotional toll on a guy like that. And he just couldn't do it anymore. So the thing is that Andrew Luck was absolutely outstanding in his first several years at Stanford. His completion percentage skyrockets from his freshman to his sophomore year, and then from his junior year, it goes up still, even though it's a very similar percentage. His freshman year, it goes at 56%. His sophomore year, it goes up to 70%. A 14% increase. The number of completed passes his sophomore year almost matched his overall throwing attempts freshman year. His junior year completions actually does match his freshman year attempts in the air, 288. Out of 404, it goes to 71.3 by his junior, which is outstanding. His touchdown interception ratio, 13-4, And at the very end, he goes from 30 to 37-10, which is really amazing. And you don't even include the 150 rushing yards and pair of touchdowns he gets running on the ground. That's 47. That's 39 touchdowns provided by that guy alone. The issue with Andrew Luck was two things. Number one, it was poor management. They didn't give him any protection. He is kind of like what Russell Wilson is now, kind of running from his life, trying to find everything he can just to survive, like one more second and just not get hit, because he's gonna get hit. You know, he was running around so much. And then the thing is, he was competing against RG3 for almost every single important accolade in college football, and RG3 got like all of them. And Luck got kind of stuck in the mud with none of them. But the thing is, he got the number 1 overall draft pick. With the way Andrew Luck's career panned out, you know what I just realized? I just did a quick search, and if Andrew Luck stayed one more year, he could have had Andy Reid as coach. Because in 2013, the Kansas City Chiefs got the number 1 overall draft pick. With said overall draft pick, they got a offensive lineman. Imagine if the Chiefs got Andrew Luck with Andy Reid. Oh my goodness, that'd be a combination for the ages. That'd be one of the deadliest combinations in the entire NFL. Had Andrew Luck stayed one more year, he could have gotten the Heisman because RG3 was gone. He could have played for Andy Reid, and his career would have panned out very differently. It could have been absolutely insane, honestly. So the thing about the first overall, quarterbacks, or the common theme for quarterbacks who go number 1 overall, it's not always about going number 1. It's also about how you get there and what you make of it after you get there. Because Andrew Luck, multiple-time Pro Bowler. Jameis Winston, I believe, he did get the Pro Bowl a couple times, but is now a backup. Jared Goff is a great starter. And Kyler Murray, the jury's still out, but so far he's been great so far. But the thing about all of these teams is that they all follow a common theme. In the case of Luck and Winston and Murray and Goff, is that the GMs were willing to build around them and find some stuff that works. Jared Goff found this high-flying, new, young head coach in Sean McVay who could adjust to his system. Kyler Murray, the GM trades for DeAndre Hopkins. And let's look at some other quarterbacks, too, even before. I'll speed round this one. Cam Newton goes to the Carolina Panthers. Makes a Super Bowl in 4 years after he gets drafted. Sam Bradford kind of becomes more or less of a bust. Maybe he should have stayed in college, honestly. The St. Louis Rams were not good at the time. And he's kind of just been on IR most years. Matt Stafford is the only thing keeping the Lions afloat. If he went to any other situation, he could have had a much better career. Jamarcus Russell, honestly, arguably considered one of the biggest busts of all time. More time to develop that football IQ, more time to develop that work ethic that he claimed that kind of cost him his career. Alex Smith, if he did not go first overall in 2005, he was not going first overall in 2006. And Aaron Rodgers would have been a San Francisco 49er. Crazy to think about. How something as simple as what year you declare for the draft changes so much. But this is not about the teams. Because I could care less about how the teams do. I care about how the guys pan out. This segment, yes, I've been talking a lot of NFL, but at the same time, this was not about the team. This was not about the teams. This was about the guys. I cared more about the guys who were involved in all this. So yes, declaring for the draft when you can is a great option. It really is. But the thing is, a lot of things have to fall in the right hands. I give a lot of merit to Mike Greenberg's comments. I really do. That's examining all the junior year quarterbacks in the past 15 years and seeing how their careers have panned out so far. Trying to figure out the debate whether junior year quarterbacks are actually worth it in the NFL. Whether it's worth taking a junior quarterback number 1 overall. We're going to have one final segment, and this was going to be a short one, because I'm going to be talking about drafts where quarterbacks have been selected 1-2. You might be asking me why I'm doing that. Because this most certainly can be a draft where that's the case. With another certain quarterback from Ohio State coming in. Stick with us.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Back here for the final time, here on the GSMC College Football Podcast, here on the GSMC Podcast Network. Once again, Ryan Lee, we have talked about a whole bunch of news revolving all around the college football atmosphere, including but not limited to the way that the COVID-19 pandemic has been handled by all the sports, including college football, comparing and contrasting them. Some comments made by ESPN's Mike Greenberg and regarding his stance on whether or not Clemson quarterback and most likely Heisman favorite Trevor Lawrence should stay in school, stay for Clemson, or just head straight to the draft. And I have used that comment to fuel a little discussion about how junior quarterbacks tend to excel in the NFL. And I'm going to be going into one last final subject because we're most likely going to be seeing it in the future. Before I get to that, I understand that this is an NCAA football show. I perfectly understand that. And I also perfectly understand that I have been speaking about a lot of NFL today. I get that as well. But there's a reason why I do it. Because all of these guys, all of these top end players, do you know where they go? They go straight in the NFL. So this isn't an NFL show. But I use it to transition that way because it's going to be the transition to these guys' career paths. They're going to go into the NFL one day. And right now, considering the fact that I've talked about all the games already, you got to look at these guys individually and see how they're going to do in their future. Because the end goal for all these athletes is the NFL. And I would love to see how a lot of these higher end players go. So with that being said, I'm going to go right into this final segment, which is 1-2 quarterback combos. And what exactly I mean by that is we're going to go back through the last several years and look at quarterbacks, the first quarterbacks taken versus the second quarterback taken. And the reason why I do this is because in almost every single power ranking I've seen, Justin Fields is considered the number 2 prospect in the entirety of the NCAA. And he is also draft eligible the same year as Trevor Lawrence. And that's why this discussion about first versus second quarterbacks taken kind of interested me a little bit, honestly. So I'm going to go back through the last several years and compare the quarterbacks in college, and then compare them at least how they've done so far in the NFL. And the specific numbers I'm going to bring up are rookie years in the NFL. The specific numbers I'm going to be referring to is the numbers they have produced overall in their NFL careers thus far. And I'm comparing them to their final year in college. Final year specifically. Because in the draft process, they don't care about what you did freshman year. They care about what you just did like 6 months ago. So that's going to be our criteria for today. One of the most recent arguments for number 1 versus number 2 was Carson Wentz and Jared Goff, current quarterbacks of the Philadelphia Eagles and the Los Angeles Rams. Now, these guys had very similar. These guys were projected to go very similar routes because Carson Wentz went to some no-name school, North Dakota State. Like, who? I've never heard of them until, Carson Wentz got out of the draft pretty much. The thing is that Carson Wentz had an absolutely amazing year, his junior year. But the thing is that his senior year, as per usual, gets usurped by injuries. He had 62.5% completion percentage in the 7 games he played, because once again, usurped by injuries. He had a little over 1,600 yards, which would have equated to about 3,700 yards had he played the full season. 39 touchdown passes were in the horizon. He had 17 in 7 games, which is a pace of about 37 touchdown throws. And his 4 interceptions in 7 games would have had a pace of 9 interceptions overall. And Jared Goff, in his last year, 64.5%, 4,700 yards, 43 and 13 is the ratio on that. And I think this is one of those circumstances where Jared Goff had the clear advantage throughout. And I think it just kind of makes sense that he is the one who went first overall. I think it would have needed a miracle for Carson Wentz to get back into the fold But also one of the big things that made Carson Wentz's draft stock kind of drop a little bit was the fact that he did get injured a lot. Still is injured a lot. None of that changed. But the thing is, both these guys have had great careers so far. That's the thing. Jared Goff so far, 62.7% completion percentage, 15,000 yards, and his current ratio in the entire NFL is 92-44. Pretty good if you ask me, honestly. Carson Wentz, also pretty good numbers. 63.6% completion percentage, 14,900 yards thus far, and his touchdown to interception ratio is 100-41, which also, like, generally speaking, is not that bad. It's actually pretty good. Multiple Pro Bowls for both guys. 1 Pro Bowl for Carson Wentz. I believe that was the year he tore his ACL. 2 Pro Bowls for Jared Goff. Carson Wentz, the NFL MVP up until he tore his ACL. So yeah, that's how those guys panned out. And honestly, they were actually really good. Let's go to another pair of quarterbacks who actually, the thing about them is that they were 1 and 2 in the entire draft once again. Because Carson Wentz was number 2, Jared Goff was number 1, and this is immediately after Winston and Mariota came into the scene. Jameis Winston, a current backup for the New Orleans Saints, and Marcus Mariota, a current backup for the Las Vegas Raiders. So the thing is that Jameis Winston was a redshirt sophomore, but as I said earlier, he had a slight regression. He had 65.3% completion percentage in his final year at Florida State. 3,900 yards, 25 touchdowns, and an interception. But the thing about Jameis Winston is that includes his numbers from the national championship run. Marcus Mariota, on the other hand, his last year, 68% in the air, 4,400 yards, and his ratio was 42-4. Mariota was insane that year. He was unstoppable. However, you can't really say the same in the NFL. In the NFL, he's been very okay. 62.9% in the air, 13,200 yards. His touchdown to interception ratio is 76-44. And the thing is that if you include his running stats as well, he adds a grand total of 11 touchdowns on the ground. Winston, on the other hand, 61.3% completion percentage, 19,700 yards, led the league in yards last year. But the thing is that his ratio is not good. 121-88, which includes that 30 interception year he had last year, which is not good. Like, I perfectly understand why Jameis Winston eventually became a backup. 30 interceptions is acceptable in 1940, when quarterbacks were not as accurate as they are today. Kind of a travesty if you think about it. I'm going to look at one more set of quarterbacks, but I'm going to throw it back a bit. Let's go back to 2012. The big decision. Robert Griffin III or Andrew Luck. And honestly, I was a big Andrew Luck fan coming out of Stanford. But at the same time, when I saw Andrew Luck, I was like, oh my god, this guy's amazing. But clearly he was. 71.3% completion percentage, 3,500 yards with a touchdown interception ratio of 37-10. And then the actual Heisman winner for that year, from Baylor, Robert Griffin, 72.4%, 4,293 yards. His touchdown interception ratio was 37-6. So same number of touchdowns, one fewer interception, about 700 more yards, an extra percent in completion. And the thing is that Andrew Luck almost had 1,000 yards rushing. He had 957 plus 7 touchdowns in his whole career at Stanford. Robert Griffin had over 2,000 yards in his whole career at Baylor and 33 touchdowns. It makes perfect sense why he had the Heisman. It was a dual threat all over the place. But the thing that's the biggest discrepancy about the Luck versus Griffin debate is their professional stats ever since they entered the NFL. 60.8% for Andrew Luck in the air. 23,600 yards. Touchdown to interception ratio is 171 to 83. Robert Griffin, on the other hand, not as great a stats throughout his career. 63.1%, 9,000 yards. 9,000 versus 23,000. Touchdown to interception ratio, 43 to 28. But at the same time, as we all know, maybe not actually, RG3's career was kind of derailed a little bit by injuries. So his rookie year, he was absolutely lights out. But the thing is that long term, he just couldn't maintain it. But the thing is that he's in an ideal role right now, which is backing up a quarterback who plays a very similar style to him. He's just younger, stronger, has faster feet, so on and so forth, in Lamar Jackson. There's a reason quarterbacks in these 1-2 discussions go the order they do. And that's just in recent years, by the way. I can go back even more recent. Kyler versus Daniel Jones was the right decision. Kyler should have been first. Baker versus Darnold. I thought Darnold was going first overall, but they wound up going with Baker. Darnold should have been first overall between those two specifically. 2017, Trubisky should not have been the first quarterback taken off the draft. It's kind of become a meme in the NFL community. Should have gone with at least Watson or Mahomes. But there's also a debate whether Patrick Mahomes would be Patrick Mahomes without Andy Reid. The answer is no, by the way. I think he'd be great, but not the level he is now. 2016, that is where we get the Goff and Wentz. 2015 is where we get Winston and Mariota. So pretty much all of the past 5 years, 4 out of the 5, the first quarterback taken should have been the first quarterback taken. I know this was a very NFL-heavy episode, but at the same time, this doesn't really speak too much in terms of the NFL itself, but how these college quarterbacks go once their time in the NCAA is over. And with that being said, thank you so much for listening to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a nice review, so that really is going to help us. Also, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and be sure to come back for the show next week, Wednesday. Thank you so much. I hope you're staying safe out there, and have a great rest of your night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.